The 42nd floor of Hawthorne Strategies gleamed like a jewel suspended above the city's sprawl. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the metropolitan skyline, while inside, the executive lounge buzzed with the controlled energy of high-stakes business. Crystal decanters caught the late afternoon light, casting amber reflections across Italian marble surfaces where Claire Hawthorne held court during a strategic break in investor meetings. Claire moved through the gathering with practiced grace, her tailored charcoal suit a perfect armor of confidence. At 35, she had transformed her father's modest consulting firm into a multinational powerhouse through sheer force of intellect and an unyielding drive that both intimidated and inspired. Tonight's presentation to the Meridian Group could secure the largest contract in company history, but for now, she allowed herself this moment of controlled relaxation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Another masterpiece, Danny, she called to her younger brother, who sat hunched over an ornate chess set near the window. Daniel Hawthorne, 32 and bearing the lean intensity of a former competitive player, had just delivered checkmate to Jennifer, a summer intern who looked both impressed and slightly shell-shocked. 15 moves, Daniel said with characteristic precision, resetting the board with fluid motions. The Sicilian defense is beautiful in theory, but it requires commitment most players can't sustain. His words carried the weight of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, a reputation built through years of dominating both chess tournaments and boardroom strategies. Claire's laugh rang through the lounge, drawing curious glances from senior executives and junior associates alike. "I've been watching my brother demolish opponents since we were children," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the space. "National champion at 16, strategy director here by 25. Honestly, I don't think there's anyone in this entire building who could give him a real game." The comment sparked murmurs of interest. Daniel's chess prowess had become something of a company legend, a symbol of the Hawthorne family's intellectual superiority that translated seamlessly into business success. Board meetings often featured chess analogies, and Daniel's ability to think 20 moves ahead had saved more than one client relationship. "Anyone want to try their luck?" Claire continued, her competitive nature fully awakened. The room fell silent, dozens of eyes shifting between the chess set and Daniel's amused expression. "Come on, we have some of the brightest minds in the city right here. Surely someone has the courage to challenge the master?" Richard Hawthorne, her uncle and chairman of the board, chuckled from his position near the bar. "Careful, Claire. Your confidence in the family brand is showing." "With good reason," she replied, raising her wine glass. "Tell you what, I'm so confident in Daniel's abilities that I'll put up a prize. Anyone who can beat him gets a week's vacation anywhere in the world, company expense account included, plus bragging rights that'll last a lifetime." The stakes energized the room. Junior associates exchanged meaningful glances, while senior partners smiled knowingly. Marcus Webb, a sharp-eyed accounting associate with ambitions that exceeded his current position, pulled out his phone and began recording discreetly. This was the kind of company lore that could make careers, or at least provide excellent social media content. "Any takers?" Daniel asked, his fingers dancing over the chess pieces with casual confidence. "I promise to go easy on you." Near the back of the gathering, barely visible behind the crowd of suits, Mark Rivera quietly observed the proceedings. His maintenance uniform marked him as invisible to most of the room's occupants. A 40-year-old man whose weathered hands spoke of honest work and whose gray-green eyes held depths that few bothered to explore. He'd been refilling water pitchers and emptying waste bins, moving through the space with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to working around important people who rarely noticed his presence. But Mark noticed everything. He'd watched Daniel play before during late-night cleaning rounds, studying the young man's style through office windows. Classical openings, aggressive middle games, and an endgame technique that showed genuine artistry. Impressive, certainly, but not without patterns, not without predictable responses to unconventional pressures. "What about you, Rivera?" The question came from Jennifer, the intern who'd just lost. She'd noticed him watching and felt emboldened by the group dynamics. "You play chess?" The room turned toward Mark, with the mild curiosity reserved for unexpected entertainment. Claire's eyebrows rose slightly. She hadn't even realized he was there, despite his quiet movements throughout the evening. Daniel glanced up from the board with polite interest, the same expression he might give to a child asking to play with grown-up toys. "A little," Mark replied, his voice carrying a quiet confidence that seemed to surprise several listeners. "With my daughter, mostly. She's 8. The admission drew good-natured laughter. Playing chess with children was charming, but hardly preparation for facing a former national champion. Claire felt a flutter of sympathy for the man. He clearly didn't understand what he'd be walking into. "That's sweet," Daniel said with genuine warmth, "but this might be a bit different from games with your little girl. The stakes here are more serious." Mark stepped closer to the chess set, his work boots silent on the plush carpet. Something in his posture shifted. Not aggressive, but focused in a way that reminded Claire of her brother's pregame rituals. "My daughter taught me that every game is serious if you're playing for the right reasons," he said simply, "and I always play for real." The room held its breath. Claire found herself reassessing the man before her, noting details she'd missed during his invisible passage through their corporate world. The intelligence in his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the complete absence of intimidation in his bearing. This wasn't what she'd expected when she made her impulsive wager. "Well then," Daniel said, gesturing toward the chair across from him, "let's see what dad moves can do against classical theory." Mark Rivera sat down and reached for the white pieces, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he touched the carved ivory king. "Just so we're clear," he said, looking directly at Claire, "when I win, that vacation offer stands?" The audacity of the statement sent ripples through the gathering. Claire felt her competitive instincts flare, even as something deeper, respect, perhaps, or recognition, stirred in her chest. "Absolutely," she replied, "when you win." Neither of them realized that Marcus Webb's phone was still recording, capturing every word of an exchange that would soon echo far beyond the marble walls of the 42nd floor. The atmosphere in Hawthorne Strategies' executive lounge had shifted from casual entertainment to electric anticipation. What began as Claire's confident boast had evolved into something more significant, a genuine challenge that drew employees from neighboring offices like moths to flame. Word spread quickly through the building's internal network. The maintenance guy was actually going to play the chess master. Mark Rivera settled into the leather chair across from Daniel with surprising ease, his work uniform a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding them. He'd removed his cleaning gloves, revealing hands that were calloused but moved with unexpected precision as he examined the chess set. The pieces were museum quality, carved from ebony and ivory, each figure a small work of art that spoke to the Hawthorne family's appreciation for excellence. "Beautiful set," Mark observed, lifting the white king to examine its craftsmanship. Indian workmanship, probably 19th century. The knight's carving is particularly fine. You can see the individual muscle lines in the horse's neck. Daniel paused in his casual arrangement of the black pieces, surprised by the specific knowledge. "You know chess sets?" "I know quality when I see it," Mark replied, setting the king back in position with reverent care. "My daughter would love this. She's been playing with a plastic set we bought at a garage sale, but she treats those pieces like they're made of gold." The mention of his daughter sparked genuine interest from Claire, who found herself leaning closer to observe the interaction. There was something touching about a father sharing his passion with his child, something that reminded her of her own relationship with her late father and his love of strategic games. "What's her name?" Claire asked, surprising herself with the personal question. "Sophia?" Mark answered, his entire demeanor softening at the mention. "Sophia Rivera. She's 8, going on 25. Smarter than her old man in most things, but she still lets me win at chess sometimes." His smile held a particular warmth reserved for beloved children. Though lately she's been inventing her own rules, makes the games more interesting. Marcus Webb positioned himself strategically near a pillar, his phone angled to capture both players while remaining inconspicuous. This was better than he'd hoped. The human interest angle would make the eventual video even more compelling. A single father, a chess prodigy CEO, and a high-stakes wager in a corporate boardroom. The social media potential was enormous. "House rules can be dangerous," Daniel said with professional amusement, beginning his pregame ritual of adjusting each piece to perfect alignment. "Chess has endured for 1,500 years precisely because its rules are inviolate. Consistency creates the framework for true mastery." "Maybe," Mark conceded, mirroring Daniel's setup process but with less ceremony. but Sophia says the best part about chess is that every game tells a story. Sometimes the story needs new words. The philosophical difference hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the gathered employees formed a loose semicircle, their conversations dropping to whispers as the actual game approached. Claire noticed Evelyn Cho, her executive assistant, watching from near the bar with an expression of thoughtful concern that she'd learned to recognize as a warning sign. Standard rules, then, Daniel confirmed, extending his hand across the board. Best of luck, Mr. Rivera. Mark, he replied, accepting the handshake with a grip that spoke of physical work and inner strength. And thank you. Though I should mention, luck's never been my strong suit. I prefer strategy. The exchange sent a small thrill through Claire that she couldn't quite identify. Confidence without arrogance was rare in her world, where most people either cowered before authority or overcompensated with bluster. Mark Rivera seemed to possess neither trait, moving instead with the quiet assurance of someone comfortable in his own skin. Your move, Daniel said, gesturing toward the board with theatrical courtesy. Mark studied the initial position for a long moment, his gray-green eyes moving across the board with systematic precision. When he finally reached for his king's pawn, the movement was deliberate and unhurried. Not the tentative touch of an amateur, but the measured consideration of someone who understood that first moves contained the seeds of final outcomes. King's pawn to e4, he announced, though the formal notation seemed almost quaint given the casual setting. Daniel responded immediately with the symmetrical king's pawn advance, and suddenly the room held its collective breath. This was happening. The maintenance worker was actually playing serious chess with the company's resident genius, and neither man seemed to be treating it as anything less than a battle of minds. So tell me about Sophia, Claire heard herself saying as the opening moves developed. What does she want to be when she grows up? Mark's face brightened even as he concentrated on Daniel's developing bishop. This week, a veterinarian who specializes in dragons. Last week, it was an astronaut chef who makes sandwiches for aliens. The week before that, a chess player who teaches pieces how to dance. The answer drew genuine laughter from the surrounding crowd, but Claire noticed that Mark never took his eyes off the board. He was maintaining conversation while tracking a complex tactical position, a skill that suggested significant playing experience. She sounds delightful, Claire said, meaning it. I'd love to meet her sometime. She'd like that, Mark replied, moving his knight to a central square with quiet confidence. She's always asking about the people I work with, wondering if they're as smart as they think they are. The comment could have been insulting, but Mark's tone held only gentle humor. Daniel, however, seemed to take it as a challenge. His next move came quickly, an aggressive pawn advance that opened tactical possibilities while slightly compromising his king's safety. Interesting choice, Mark murmured, leaning back in his chair to consider the new position. Sophia would call that a brave soldier move, charging ahead without looking for traps. Sometimes aggression is the best policy, Daniel replied, though something in his voice suggested he was already second-guessing the advance. Maybe, Mark agreed, reaching for his queen's knight. But Sophia also taught me that the bravest pieces are usually the ones that protect their friends. The knight landed on a square that seemed innocuous but created multiple tactical threats, each one hidden beneath layers of positional complexity. Claire found herself holding her breath as she realized that Mark Rivera was not just playing chess. He was playing it at a level that demanded Daniel's complete attention. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, drawn by the growing tension and the unexpected competence of the underdog challenger. Marcus Webb adjusted his phone's angle, ensuring he captured every moment of what was becoming a genuinely compelling contest. Your move, Daniel, Mark said quietly, his hands folded calmly as he waited for the response. For the first time since the game began, Daniel Hawthorne looked genuinely uncertain. The silence in the executive lounge had become thick enough to cut. What started as casual entertainment had transformed into something approaching reverence as the chess match unfolded with increasing complexity. Daniel Hawthorne, accustomed to quick victories over corporate colleagues, found himself deep in thought for the first time in months, his usual confident rhythm disrupted by an opponent who refused to follow familiar patterns. Mark Rivera sat with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for buses, for doctor's appointments, for his daughter to finish homework. But his stillness held focus rather than passivity, gray-green eyes tracking the board's possibilities with systematic precision. Each of Daniel's moves was met with calm consideration, followed by responses that seemed simple until their deeper implications became clear. Unconventional, Daniel murmured, studying the position after Mark's latest knight maneuver. The piece had moved to a square that classical theory would consider premature, yet it created subtle pressure that made Daniel's planned continuation suddenly uncomfortable. Sophia calls it the sneaky horse, Mark explained, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She says knights are best when they pretend to be doing one thing while actually doing something else entirely. The explanation drew nervous laughter from the gathered crowd, but Claire noticed that several of the senior executives were no longer smiling. The maintenance workers' pieces were developing with purpose, creating a position that looked deceptively casual while containing hidden tactical venom. Marcus Webb adjusted his phone's position, ensuring he captured both players' faces as the tension mounted. This was better than he'd hoped. Genuine drama, unfolding in real time with significant company personalities at stake. The video would be compelling regardless of outcome, but if the impossible actually happened. Daniel's next move came after nearly 5 minutes of calculation, unusual for someone known for rapid, intuitive play. He advanced his center pawn, opening lines for his pieces while creating immediate threats against Mark's position. It was the kind of aggressive continuation that had served him well in tournament play, forcing opponents to respond to concrete dangers rather than pursuing their own plans. Mark studied the new position with unhurried attention, occasionally nodding as if confirming calculations only he could see. When he finally moved, it was with a quiet confidence that sent ripples through the watching crowd. His bishop slid to a diagonal that seemed to accomplish nothing while accomplishing everything, simultaneously defending against Daniel's threat and creating counterplay that forced the young chessmaster into unfamiliar territory. "Dad move number 2, Mark announced gently. "Sophia invented this one after watching me fix her bicycle. She said sometimes you have to make something look broken before you can make it work better." The comment would have seemed like casual banter if not for the growing complexity of the position. Daniel's carefully constructed advantage was evaporating under pressure from pieces that seemed to move according to principles taught in no chess manual. Each of Mark's moves violated conventional wisdom while achieving concrete improvements in position. Claire found herself leaning forward, her wine forgotten as she watched her brother's confidence slowly drain away. Daniel was playing well, excellently in fact, but he was being outmaneuvered by someone who approached chess like a conversation rather than a battle, each move flowing naturally from the last in patterns that felt organic rather than calculated. "Check," Mark said quietly, his voice carrying no triumph, only the calm statement of fact. The word hit the crowd like electricity. Daniel's king was indeed under attack, forced to move by a discovery that had appeared from nowhere, or rather, from several moves of careful preparation that had looked like random piece development. The position was still complex, far from decided, but the psychological shift was undeniable. The former national champion was being pressed by a maintenance worker whose dad moves were proving more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Daniel moved his king to safety, but his usual composure was cracking. Sweat appeared on his forehead despite the lounge's comfortable temperature, and his pieces began to move with less certainty, more calculation. He was playing not to lose rather than playing to win, a fundamental shift that Mark seemed to sense immediately. "Sophia has a rule about scared pieces," Mark observed conversationally as he continued his methodical improvement of position. "She says when pieces get worried, they start making choices to avoid bad things instead of choosing good things. Makes them easier to catch." The wisdom was delivered without condescension, but its accuracy was becoming painfully evident. Daniel's pieces were indeed retreating, consolidating, looking for safety rather than seeking opportunities. Each defensive move created new weaknesses that Mark exploited with gentle precision. "Another check," Mark announced, this time with a queen move that seemed to materialize from thin air. The second check was more forcing than the first, driving Daniel's king toward the center of the board, where it would be vulnerable to further attack. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Even Richard Hawthorne had moved from his position near the bar to observe the unfolding drama. "This is impossible," someone whispered, though Claire couldn't identify the speaker. But it wasn't impossible. It was happening with inexorable logic, each of Mark's moves building toward a conclusion that was becoming clearer with every exchange. Daniel was fighting for his life on the board, his pieces scrambling to create defensive formations that Mark dismantled with surgical precision. The final sequence unfolded with mathematical beauty. Mark's pieces converged on Daniel's exposed king-like dancers following choreography, each move eliminating another escape square until only one possibility remained. "Checkmate," Mark said softly, his voice carrying no triumph, only the gentle finality of a bedtime story reaching its natural conclusion. The room erupted in gasps and scattered applause, though several executives looked more shocked than celebratory. Daniel stared at the board in disbelief, his mind racing through the game's progression, trying to identify where his advantage had slipped away. The position was indeed mate, elegant, forcing, and absolutely final. 15 moves, Mark observed, beginning to reset the pieces with the same reverent care he'd shown at the game's beginning. Sophia would be proud. She says the best stories are the ones that end before people get bored. Claire felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Her brother, the family genius, the strategic mastermind whose reputation had helped build their corporate empire, had been defeated by a maintenance worker using tactics learned from playing with his 8-year-old daughter. The implications were staggering, both personally and professionally. "Good game," Daniel managed, extending his hand across the board with visible effort. His face was pale, but he maintained enough composure to observe social niceties. "I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I, until it happened," Mark replied, accepting the handshake with gentle dignity. "Sophia always says the best moves are the ones that surprise everyone, including the person making them." As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and disbelief, Marcus Webb slipped away toward the elevators, his phone already uploading the captured video to internal servers. This was news, real, viral, career-making news, and he intended to be the first to share it. Claire remained frozen by the chess table, watching Mark carefully return each piece to its starting position while her brother sat in stunned silence. The maintenance worker, who had just shattered her family's intellectual pride, was humming softly under his breath, a children's song that seemed to float through the marble and crystal elegance of the 42nd floor, like a reminder that there were other kinds of intelligence, other ways of seeing the world. The wager had been won, but Claire was beginning to suspect that winning and losing might be more complicated than she'd ever imagined. Claire Hawthorne's phone began buzzing at 6:47 a.m., the insistent vibration cutting through her usual morning routine like a chainsaw through silk. By the time she had poured her first cup of coffee in the granite and steel kitchen of her penthouse apartment, 17 missed calls and 43 text messages had accumulated on the device that normally served as her lifeline to corporate control. The video had gone viral overnight. Marcus Webb's recording, initially shared through Hawthorne Strategies' internal network as harmless office gossip, had escaped into the wild landscape of social media with the unstoppable momentum of a forest fire. By midnight, it had appeared on LinkedIn with the caption, quote, "Corporate chess master destroyed by building maintenance worker." By 3 a.m., TikTok users had remixed it with dramatic music and slow-motion replays of Daniel's facial expressions. By dawn, Twitter was calling it the most savage chess comeback since Bobby Fischer and, quote, "class warfare on 64 squares." Claire scrolled through the notifications with growing horror, watching her carefully cultivated corporate image dissolve in real time. The video had been edited, enhanced, annotated with commentary that ranged from admiring to brutal. Someone had created a GIF of Daniel's shocked expression at the final checkmate. Another user had superimposed the game over classical music, turning Mark's victory into a 3-minute symphony of tactical brilliance. Hawthorne Strategies, CEO watches brother get schooled by janitor, read one headline. When your company's strategic genius loses to dad moves, proclaimed another. The worst part wasn't the mockery. Claire had weathered corporate criticism before, but the growing narrative that painted the entire Hawthorne organization as out-of-touch elitists who had finally met their intellectual match in the form of honest working-class wisdom. Her office phone was ringing before she arrived at the building. Evelyn Cho, her executive assistant, met her at the private elevator with an expression that managed to combine professional composure with barely concealed panic. "The board has called an emergency meeting for 9 o'clock, Evelyn reported, matching Claire's brisk pace as they moved toward the executive floor. Mr. Richard Hawthorne has been fielding calls since 5 this morning. 3 major clients have requested clarification about company leadership stability. The PR department is overwhelmed. How bad is it? Claire asked, though the tightness in her chest suggested she already knew the answer. The video has been viewed 2.3 million times across all platforms, Evelyn replied, consulting her tablet with the efficiency that had made her indispensable over their decade of working together. The company's social media mentions have increased by 4,000%, and approximately 60% of the commentary is unfavorable to the family brand. The boardroom was already occupied when Claire arrived, the mahogany table surrounded by the stern faces of Hawthorne Strategies, directors, and senior partners. Richard Hawthorne sat at the head of the table like a judge preparing to deliver sentence, his silver hair perfectly styled, despite the early hour, and his navy blazer bearing the subtle authority of old money and older grievances. "Claire," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the controlled fury that had made him legendary in hostile takeover negotiations, "we need to discuss damage control." "Uncle Richard?" "The Meridian Group called at 6 this morning," he continued, cutting off her attempt at explanation. "They're concerned about associating their brand with what they called corporate instability and questionable judgment. The Patterson account is requesting a meeting to reassess our consulting relationship. And I've received 3 separate calls from board members questioning whether this family has the professional composure necessary to lead a multinational organization." Claire took her seat with as much dignity as she could muster, acutely aware that every person in the room had watched the video of her brother's defeat multiple times. The mathematics of corporate politics were unforgiving. Daniel's intellectual reputation was a cornerstone of the Hawthorne brand, and that cornerstone had just crumbled in front of millions of viewers. "It was a chess game," she said finally, though the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "A friendly wager that got out of hand due to social media amplification." "It was a public humiliation," Richard replied sharply. "Your brother, our strategy director, the man whose intellectual credentials we've spent years building into our corporate identity, was defeated by a maintenance worker using tactics he learned from playing with his daughter. The optics are catastrophic." Down the hall, Daniel Hawthorne sat alone in his corner office, staring at a computer screen that displayed the viral video for the 100th time. He had arrived before dawn, hoping to avoid the curious glances and whispered conversations that would inevitably follow him through the building. The game itself wasn't what tormented him. Losses happened, even to masters. What aided his pride was the casual way Mark Rivera had dismantled his classical approach, using principles that existed nowhere in the chess literature he had spent 20 years studying. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His phone buzzed with interview requests from chess websites, business magazines, and social media influencers who wanted to analyze the game move by move. The position would be studied, discussed, dissected by players around the world who would debate whether his defeat represented a failure of traditional chess education or a breakthrough in creative tactical thinking. 3 floors below, Mark Rivera pushed his cleaning cart through the building's gleaming corridors with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized his work for the past 18 months. He had seen the video, of course. His neighbor's teenage son had shown it to him with barely contained excitement, but the attention made him deeply uncomfortable. Fame was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially when it might complicate his employment at one of the few companies that offered the health insurance Sophia needed for her asthma treatments. The curious glances from passing employees told him that recognition was inevitable. Whispers followed him through the cafeteria and break areas, some admiring, others skeptical, most simply confused by the sudden elevation of someone they had never bothered to notice. A few junior associates had approached him tentatively, asking about chess lessons or wanting to hear stories about the game that had made him accidentally famous. "Mr. Rivera?" The voice belonged to Jennifer Walsh, the intern who had witnessed his victory the previous evening. She approached with the careful respect typically reserved for visiting dignitaries, her usual confidence replaced by something approaching awe. "I just wanted to say, that was incredible. I've been playing chess since I was 12, and I've never seen anything like those combinations." "Thank you," Mark replied simply, though the attention made him want to disappear into the building's infrastructure like he had for the past year and a half. Would you maybe show me some of those moves sometime? The way you trapped his pieces was amazing." Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message that made his heart skip several beats. It was from Sophia's school. "Please call immediately regarding Sophia's condition. She's stable, but having difficulty breathing." The chess game, the viral video, the corporate chaos, all of it evaporated in an instant as Mark abandoned his cart and ran toward the parking garage, his work boots echoing through the marble corridors like gunshots. Behind him, the building continued its daily rhythm of business and gossip, unaware that the man at the center of their entertainment was racing toward the only thing that truly mattered in his carefully constructed world. The asthma attack that would change everything had begun. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows that made everyone look sickly, but Sofia Rivera's face was genuinely pale as she lay in the pediatric emergency room bed, oxygen mask covering half her small features. Mark sat beside her, his large hand dwarfing her tiny fingers as monitors tracked her breathing with electronic precision that felt both reassuring and terrifying. The attack was more severe than usual, Dr. Patricia Chen explained, her voice carrying the careful calm that pediatric specialists used when delivering news that parents didn't want to hear. Her oxygen saturation dropped to dangerous levels before the paramedics arrived. "We've stabilized her, but we need to discuss adjusting her treatment protocol." Mark nodded, though his attention remained focused on his daughter's chest, watching each breath with the desperate intensity of someone who understood how precious and fragile the simple act of breathing could be. Sophia's eyes were closed, but her hand squeezed his fingers periodically, a signal they had developed during previous hospital visits that meant, "I'm okay, Daddy. Don't worry so much." "The new medications we discussed last month," Dr. Chen continued, consulting her tablet with professional efficiency, "they would significantly improve her quality of life and reduce the frequency of these emergency situations. However, insurance coverage remains an issue." The familiar weight of financial impossibility settled on Mark's shoulders like a lead blanket. Sophia's current medication regimen was adequate for managing her condition, but the newer treatments that could give her a normal childhood, the ability to run and play without constantly monitoring her breathing, cost more than his annual salary. The irony wasn't lost on him that he cleaned offices in a building where single bonuses exceeded what he would earn in a decade. "We'll figure something out," he said, the same promise he had made every month for the past 2 years, though his options seemed to narrow with each hospital visit. 2 floors above, Claire Hawthorne stood in the hospital's administrative offices, her presence having been requested by security after she had attempted to use her corporate influence to expedite Sophia's treatment. The conversation with the hospital's chief financial officer was not going well. "Ms. Hawthorne, while we appreciate your concern for your employee," the administrator said with the practiced patience reserved for wealthy individuals who believed money could solve every problem, "we cannot accept personal payment for another patient's medical expenses without proper documentation and consent. There are legal protocols." "He works for my company," Claire interrupted, her frustration evident despite her attempts to maintain professional composure. "His daughter is having an asthma attack. I'm simply trying to ensure she receives the best possible care." "That's admirable, but you'll need to coordinate with Mr. Rivera directly. We cannot process payment from third parties without explicit authorization from the patient's guardian." Claire left the administrative offices feeling more helpless than she had since her father's death 15 years earlier. The viral video that had consumed her morning suddenly seemed trivial compared to watching an 8-year-old struggle to breathe, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the two crises were somehow connected, that her family's public humiliation and Sophia's medical emergency were threads in the same complicated tapestry. She found Mark in the cafeteria 3 hours later, slumped over a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he filled out insurance forms with the methodical desperation of someone fighting a system designed to exhaust rather than assist. "How is she?" Claire asked, settling into the plastic chair across from him without invitation. Mark looked up with eyes that held the particular exhaustion of parents who had spent too many nights in hospital waiting rooms. "Stable. They're keeping her overnight for observation, but she should be able to go home tomorrow if her oxygen levels stay consistent." "Good, I'm glad she's okay." They sat in silence for several minutes, surrounded by the low-level chaos of a hospital cafeteria where worried families maintained vigils over vending machine sandwiches and coffee that tasted like desperation. Claire found herself studying Mark's face, noting details she had missed during their brief previous interactions, the lines around his eyes that spoke of chronic worry, the careful way he held himself, as if ready to spring into action at any moment. "I tried to help with the medical bills," she said finally, the words coming out more awkwardly than she had intended. "The hospital wouldn't let me pay directly, but if you need assistance." "Why?" Mark's question was quiet but sharp, cutting through her offer with surgical precision. Because your daughter is sick, and you work for my company, and because you feel guilty about the chess game?" His gray-green eyes held steady on her face, reading expressions with the same tactical precision he had demonstrated at the chessboard. "Because the video made your family look bad, and helping the poor maintenance worker might improve the optics." Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks, partly from embarrassment but mostly from anger at being so accurately assessed. I'm not trying to buy good publicity. I'm concerned about a child's welfare." "Are you?" Mark asked, his tone remaining level despite the challenge in his words. "Because until yesterday, you didn't know I existed. None of your people did. I've been cleaning your offices for 18 months, and this is the first conversation we've ever had that wasn't about emptying trash cans or refilling water dispensers." The accusation hung between them like smoke, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Claire realized that Mark was absolutely right. She had moved through her corporate world in a bubble of executive privilege, surrounded by people whose job it was to handle details like building maintenance. He had been invisible to her, just another piece of functional infrastructure that kept her business running smoothly. "You're right," she admitted, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "I didn't notice you before. I should have, but I didn't. That doesn't mean my concern now isn't genuine. Doesn't it?" Mark gathered his insurance paperwork with careful efficiency, his movement suggesting the conversation was ending whether Claire wanted it to or not. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the only reason you know my name is because I embarrassed your brother in front of a camera. And now you want to write a check to make the guilt go away." Claire felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she hadn't realized she had built around her capacity for genuine human connection. "What if you're wrong?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm here because watching your daughter struggle to breathe made me realize that there are more important things than corporate image management?" Mark stood, his considerable height making him tower over the small cafeteria table. "Then prove it," he said simply. "But don't expect me to be grateful for scraps of attention, just because they come from someone who can afford to throw money at problems." He walked away without looking back, leaving Claire alone with her cold coffee and the uncomfortable realization that her assumptions about charity, about class, about the motivations behind human kindness, might be as flawed as Daniel's assumptions about chess strategy had been the previous evening. Outside Sophia's room, Mark paused to collect himself before returning to his daughter's bedside. Through the small window, he could see her sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and unlabored for the first time in 12 hours. The sight filled him with the particular relief that parents felt when their children were safe, but it also reminded him of how precarious that safety really was. Claire Hawthorne's offer of help might have been genuine, but accepting assistance from the corporate world that had just turned his private life into public entertainment felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked to build. His dignity, his independence, his ability to provide for Sophia through his own efforts. These things mattered more than money, even when money was desperately needed. But as he watched his daughter sleep, Mark couldn't shake the memory of Claire's expression in the cafeteria, the way her carefully constructed corporate composure had cracked to reveal something that looked remarkably like genuine concern. Perhaps he had been too quick to judge her motives, just as she had been too slow to see him as anything more than building maintenance. The possibility that they might both be wrong about each other would have to wait. For now, Sophia needed him to be her father first and everything else second, just as he had been for the past 8 years. Everything else, viral videos, corporate politics, the complicated question of whether pride was worth more than his daughter's health, would have to wait until morning. Claire Hawthorne's day had stretched into evening, like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. The emergency board meeting had lasted 4 hours, followed by crisis management calls with the PR firm, damage control conversations with 3 major clients, and a heated discussion with Daniel about taking a temporary leave of absence until the viral storm subsided. By 9:30 p.m., the executive floors of Hawthorne Strategies were finally empty, except for the cleaning crews and the occasional workaholic who had forgotten that life existed outside fluorescent-lit cubicles. She had intended to go straight home to her penthouse apartment, pour a glass of wine that cost more than most people's car payments, and forget that this day had ever happened. Instead, she found herself wandering the empty corridors, checking her phone compulsively for updates on social media metrics that continued trending in directions that made her stomach clench with anxiety. The parking garage beneath the building was a concrete cavern that echoed with the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional car door closing as late workers finally headed home. Claire's heels clicked against the polished floor with metronomic precision as she walked toward her reserved space, her mind still churning through the day's cascade of corporate disasters. That's when she heard the crying. Not the professional tears of a frustrated executive or the quiet sobs of someone dealing with work stress, but the desperate, panicked crying of a child in genuine distress. The sound cut through her corporate preoccupations like a blade, triggering instincts she hadn't known she possessed. She followed the sound around a concrete pillar and found them near the building's loading dock, Mark Rivera kneeling beside his daughter, who was sitting on the garage floor with her back against a concrete wall, gasping for air between terrified sobs. Sophia's small chest was rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths that seemed to provide no relief, and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that Claire recognized from medical dramas as a very bad sign. "Daddy, I can't breathe right." Sophia managed between gasps, her 8-year-old voice carrying the particular terror of someone whose body was betraying them in ways they couldn't understand or control. Mark's hands shook as he searched through a small backpack, pulling out an inhaler that clearly wasn't providing adequate relief. His face was pale with the specific panic that belonged to parents watching their children suffer, and Claire could see him fighting to maintain calm while his world collapsed around him. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We're going to get help. Just try to take slow breaths like we practiced." Claire didn't hesitate. The corporate executive who had spent the day worried about image management and stock prices evaporated, replaced by someone whose only concern was getting immediate medical attention for a child who couldn't breathe. "Call 911, she said, pulling out her phone while moving toward them. "I'm calling the company medical service and the hospital." Mark looked up at her with surprise and something that might have been relief. "Claire, what are you?" "Later," she said curtly, already dialing. "Right now we need to get Sophia help." The next 20 minutes unfolded with the controlled chaos of an emergency medical response. Claire used her corporate connections ruthlessly, authorizing the company's executive medical service to respond to the parking garage, calling ahead to Presbyterian Hospital to alert their pediatric emergency team, and arranging for immediate transport in a way that bypassed normal protocols through sheer force of institutional influence. "This is Claire Hawthorne from Hawthorne Strategies," she said into her phone with the authority that had made her legendary in boardroom negotiations. "I need immediate medical attention for an 8-year-old girl experiencing severe respiratory distress. Corporate account authorization code 77 Alpha 9. Yes, I'll take full financial responsibility." Sophia's breathing had worsened by the time the paramedics arrived, but Claire's advance calls had prepared them for a patient whose condition required immediate intervention. They worked with professional efficiency, establishing IV access and administering medication while preparing Sophia for transport to the hospital's pediatric emergency department. "Daddy?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper as they lifted her onto the gurney, her small hand reaching for Mark with desperate need. "I'm right here, sweetheart," Mark replied, grasping her fingers while walking alongside the moving stretcher. "I'm not going anywhere." Claire followed them to the ambulance, her expensive shoes clicking against concrete as her mind raced through logistics. "I'll drive behind you," she told Mark. "Whatever the hospital needs. Insurance information, authorizations, anything. I'll handle it." "You don't have to," Mark began, but Claire cut him off. "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "Let me help, please." The emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital moved with practiced efficiency, Sophia's condition having been communicated ahead of arrival through Claire's corporate connections. Dr. Chen, the pediatric pulmonologist who had treated Sophia before, was waiting when they arrived, along with respiratory therapists and nursing staff, who immediately took over her care. Severe asthma exacerbation with respiratory compromise, Dr. Chen observed, reviewing Sophia's vital signs while medications began taking effect. "We caught it in time, but she'll need overnight observation and significant adjustment to her treatment protocol." Mark sat beside Sophia's bed in the pediatric emergency room, holding her hand while monitors tracked her gradually improving breathing. The terror in his eyes was beginning to fade, replaced by exhaustion and the particular gratitude that belonged to parents whose children had been pulled back from the edge of genuine danger. Claire stood near the door, feeling simultaneously essential and superfluous. Her corporate influence had expedited Sophia's treatment and ensured she received immediate attention. But now that the crisis was passing, she wasn't sure what role she was supposed to play in the recovery process. "Thank you," Mark said quietly, not looking away from his daughter's face. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Claire replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "No," Mark said, finally meeting her eyes. "Not anyone. Not for someone like me." The comment hung in the air between them, carrying implications about class and privilege, and the complicated dynamics that existed between people who lived in different economic universes. Claire realized that Mark was right. Her response to Sophia's emergency had been driven by instincts she hadn't known she possessed, but it had also been enabled by resources and connections that most people simply didn't have access to. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Chen announced, checking Sophia's latest blood oxygen readings. "The new medication protocol is working well and her breathing has stabilized significantly. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but I expect her to make a full recovery." Sophia's eyes fluttered open, still groggy from medication but no longer carrying the panicked desperation that had terrified everyone an hour earlier. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Right here, sweetheart," Mark replied, squeezing her hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Sophia said, her voice stronger than it had been in the parking garage. "Who's the pretty lady?" Claire felt an unexpected warmth in her chest as Sophia's curious eyes focused on her with the direct attention that only children possessed. "I'm Claire," she said, moving closer to the bed. "I work with your daddy." "You're the one whose brother lost at chess," Sophia observed, with the matter-of-fact tone that children used when stating obvious truths. "Daddy said he used my moves to win." "He did," Claire confirmed, surprised by how easy it felt to talk to this small girl who had just scared everyone half to death. "Your daddy is very good at chess." "I know," Sophia said proudly. "He taught me how to make the pieces dance when they're not in games. Want to see sometime?" Before Claire could answer, Sophia's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline and medication that had sustained her through the crisis. Mark adjusted her blanket with the gentle precision that spoke of years of practice, his movements carrying the particular tenderness that belonged to single parents who had learned to be everything their children needed. "She likes you," Mark observed quietly, settling back into his chair beside the bed. "I like her too," Claire replied, meaning it completely. "She's remarkable." "She is," Mark agreed, his voice carrying the fierce pride that had driven every decision he had made for the past 8 years. "And she's going to be fine." Claire nodded, though she realized that fine was a relative term when applied to children whose medical needs exceeded their families' financial resources. The emergency was over, but the underlying problems that had created it remained unchanged. Sophia would return to her plastic chess set and her father's careful management of her condition, while Claire would return to her corporate world, where the cost of Sophia's treatment represented less than a rounding error in the company's quarterly budget. The irony wasn't lost on her that the viral video which had caused her so much professional embarrassment had also brought her face-to-face with problems that mattered far more than corporate image management. In the harsh fluorescent light of the pediatric emergency room, surrounded by the quiet beeping of monitors that tracked a little girl's breathing, Claire began to understand that there were different kinds of winning and losing than the ones she had spent her life pursuing. The knock on Mark Rivera's apartment door came at 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after Sophia had been discharged from the hospital with a new medication regimen that was already showing promising results. Mark opened the door expecting to see Mrs. Chen from down the hall, who occasionally borrowed sugar or needed help reaching items on high shelves in the building's aging grocery store. Instead, he found Claire Hawthorne standing in the narrow hallway of his apartment building, looking profoundly out of place in her tailored business suit among the scuffed walls and fluorescent lighting that spoke of working-class functionality rather than aesthetic design. "Hi," she said, holding up a small gift bag with the uncertain smile of someone who wasn't sure of their welcome. "I brought something for Sophia." "If this is a bad time, Claire?" Sophia's voice called from the living room, where she had been working on homework at the kitchen table that doubled as their dining room, desk, and general workspace. "Is that the pretty lady from the hospital?" Mark stepped aside to let Claire enter, noting how she took in their modest surroundings with curious rather than judgmental eyes. The apartment was small, but scrupulously clean, its walls decorated with Sophia's artwork, and a few photographs that captured precious moments in their small family's history. The plastic chess set sat on a side table near the window, its pieces arranged in the middle of a game they had been playing before Sophia's afternoon medication. "I hope I'm not intruding," Claire said, though Sophia's enthusiastic wave from the kitchen table suggested otherwise. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on how you're feeling." "Much better," Sophia announced, bouncing slightly in her chair with energy that would have been impossible during her recent medical crisis. "The new medicine makes breathing way easier. Want to see?" She took an exaggerated deep breath and held it for several seconds before releasing it slowly, demonstrating the lung capacity that had been compromised during her emergency room visit. The simple act filled Mark with relief that never quite faded, even days after the crisis had passed. "That's wonderful," Claire said, settling into the offered chair across from Sophia with surprising ease. "I brought you something, if your dad says it's okay." Mark nodded his permission, curious about what someone from Claire's world would consider an appropriate gift for an 8-year-old from his. She opened the bag carefully and withdrew a chess set that made both Mark and Sophia gasp with genuine amazement. The pieces were carved from rosewood and maple, each figure a work of art that captured intricate details and miniature sculptures. The board itself was inlaid with alternating squares of rich dark wood and pale maple, bordered by brass fittings that caught the afternoon light streaming through their small living room window. "It's beautiful," Sophia whispered, reaching out to touch the white queen with reverent fingertips. "But it must have cost so much money." "It's a gift," Claire said gently, "and gifts don't have price tags attached. Besides, your dad told me you've been playing with a plastic set, and I thought you might enjoy something a little more special." Mark felt a complex mixture of gratitude and discomfort at the gesture. The chess set was clearly expensive, probably worth more than he earned in a month. But Sophia's delight was so genuine that refusing seemed cruel. More than that, Claire's presentation of the gift had been thoughtful rather than condescending, acknowledging Sophia's existing passion rather than attempting to create one. "What do you say, sweetheart?" Mark prompted. "Thank you," Sophia said, carefully lifting the white king to examine its carved details. "Look, Daddy, you can see the little crown jewels and everything. This king looks way more important than our plastic one." "All pieces are important in their own way," Claire observed, watching Sophia arrange the new pieces with careful attention to their proper positions. "The expensive ones just get more attention." "That's what Daddy always says," Sophia replied, beginning to set up both sides of the board with practiced efficiency. "He says the best chess players remember that every piece has a job to do, even the little pawns." "Your father is a very wise man," Claire said, glancing at Mark with an expression that seemed to hold genuine respect rather than the polite condescension he had expected. "Want to play a game?" Sophia asked, her enthusiasm bubbling over as she finished arranging the pieces. "I can show you some of the moves Daddy taught me. We have special rules that make it more fun." Claire looked to Mark for permission, receiving a slight nod that contained more trust than he had planned to offer. "I'd love to learn your special rules," she said, settling into the chair across from Sophia while Mark observed from the kitchen, ostensibly preparing tea, but actually monitoring the interaction between his daughter and a woman whose world operated according to principles he was still trying to understand. "Okay," Sophia said, her face lighting up with the particular joy of a child given permission to share something precious. "First rule. When pieces get captured, they don't really die. They go to the side of the board and watch the rest of the game like they're learning for next time." "That's much nicer than regular chess," Claire agreed, though Mark noticed she was paying attention with the focus typically reserved for important business presentations. "Second rule, if you make a move that helps the other person's pieces get safer, even if it doesn't help you win, you get to say, 'friendship move,' and it counts as something special." Claire's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. "What makes it special?" "You remember it forever," Sophia explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possessed. "Daddy says the best parts of games aren't always about winning. Sometimes they're about making sure everyone has fun playing." The game that followed was unlike anything Claire had experienced in her years of watching chess as a strategic exercise. Sophia played with creative joy rather than competitive intensity, her moves guided by curiosity and imagination rather than tactical calculation. When Claire made an obvious blunder that would have lost her queen, Sophia quietly suggested an alternative move that might be more fun for both of us. "You're very good at this," Claire said after Sophia had demonstrated a sequence she called the dancing horses, where knights moved in patterns that created temporary artistic arrangements on the board. "Daddy taught me that chess is like telling stories," Sophia explained, repositioning pieces to show how they could work together rather than against each other. "Every game has different characters, and sometimes the best stories are when everyone finds a way to be happy at the end." Mark watched from the kitchen as Claire absorbed his daughter's unique approach to the ancient game, noting how the corporate executive's usual intensity had been replaced by something approaching wonder. Sophia had that effect on people. Her capacity for finding joy in complexity had a way of reminding adults that intelligence could be expressed through kindness rather than conquest. "Friendship move," Sophia announced as Claire made a sacrifice that protected Sophia's king while leaving her own pieces vulnerable. "How did you know?" Claire asked, surprised by how accurately Sophia had read her intentions. "Because you smiled when you did it," Sophia replied simply. "People only smile like that when they're doing something nice for someone else." The observation hung in the air between them, carrying implications about motivation and kindness that extended far beyond the 64 squares of the chessboard. Claire realized that Sophia's special rules weren't just modifications to chess. They were a philosophy of interaction that prioritized connection over competition, understanding over victory. As the afternoon stretched into evening and Mark prepared a simple dinner that Claire accepted with genuine appreciation, he began to understand that something fundamental was shifting in the careful boundaries he had constructed around his small family. Claire Hawthorne wasn't just visiting out of guilt or corporate image management. She was here because Sophia's joy was infectious, and Mark's quiet wisdom was worth learning from. For the first time since the viral video had disrupted their lives, Mark allowed himself to consider the possibility that some bridges were worth building, even when they spanned worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. The Hawthorne Strategies boardroom had witnessed countless hostile negotiations over the years, but the tension crackling across its mahogany table during the emergency session felt different, more personal, more corrosive. Richard Hawthorne sat at the head of the polished conference table like a judge preparing to deliver sentence, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early morning hour, and his navy blazer bearing the subtle authority of generational wealth and older grievances. "Hero now. The situation has deteriorated beyond acceptable parameters," Richard announced to the assembled board members, his voice carrying the controlled fury that had made him legendary in corporate warfare. "3 major clients have requested meetings to reassess their consulting relationships. The Patterson Group has suspended their retainer pending resolution of what they termed leadership stability concerns, and our stock price has dropped 8% since that damned video went viral." Claire sat at his right hand, her usual position as heir apparent, feeling more like the defendant's chair as she faced the tribunal of senior partners and external board members who controlled the company's destiny. Daniel was notably absent from the meeting, having taken what Richard diplomatically called, quote, personal leave, after his chess defeat had become the subject of late-night television commentary and business school case studies. "The optics are catastrophic," continued Margaret Westfield, the board's lead independent director, consulting her tablet with the clinical precision of a surgeon examining X-rays. "Our entire brand identity has been built around intellectual superiority and strategic excellence. Having our strategy director publicly defeated by a maintenance worker using tactics learned from his child undermines 15 years of careful positioning." "It was a chess game," Claire said, though the words felt increasingly hollow each time she repeated them. "A friendly wager that was amplified beyond all reasonable proportion by social media. It was a public humiliation that called into question the fundamental competencies of this family's leadership," Richard replied sharply. "Your brother's reputation was a cornerstone of our corporate identity, and that cornerstone just crumbled in front of 3 million viewers." The numbers were actually higher now. The video had been viewed over 5 million times across all platforms, spawning reaction videos, analysis pieces, and think pieces about class warfare in corporate America. Someone had created a remix set to classical music that turned Mark's victory into a 3-minute symphony of tactical brilliance. Another user had compiled a highlights reel of Daniel's facial expressions during the losing sequence, set to increasingly dramatic music that built toward the final checkmate. The Meridian Group called this morning, added James Morrison, the company's chief financial officer, his voice carrying the particular dread reserved for conversations about lost revenue. They're concerned about associating their brand with what they called corporate instability and questionable judgment. They want assurances that the Hawthorne family maintains the professional composure necessary to handle their account. Claire felt the walls closing in around her, each board member's concern adding to the weight of expectation that had defined her entire adult life. The company her father had built, the empire she had spent 15 years expanding, was being threatened by a chess game that had revealed uncomfortable truths about the assumptions underlying their corporate culture. "What do you propose we do?" she asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "Damage control," Richard replied immediately, sliding a folder across the table with the efficiency of someone who had already made the necessary decisions. "First, we issue a public statement emphasizing that the chess match was informal entertainment that doesn't reflect our professional capabilities. Second, we implement new protocols to prevent employees from creating viral content featuring company personnel. Third, we address the underlying problem." "Which is?" Claire asked, though the tightness in her chest suggested she already knew. "The maintenance worker," Margaret said bluntly. "Mr. Rivera's continued presence in the building creates an ongoing narrative problem. Every day he remains employed. Here is another day the media can frame this as a story about working-class wisdom triumphing over corporate arrogance." "You want to fire him?" Claire said, the statement hanging in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. "We want to resolve a public relations crisis," Richard corrected, though his meaning was unmistakable. "Mr. Rivera's employment contract contains standard clauses about maintaining company reputation. His inadvertent participation in viral content that damages our brand provides legal justification for termination." "He didn't create the video," Claire protested, her voice carrying more heat than she had intended. "He was manipulated into a situation where someone else recorded him without his knowledge or consent." "Intent is irrelevant," Margaret replied with the cold logic that had made her successful in corporate law. "Impact is what matters. His presence has become a liability that threatens client relationships and shareholder value." Claire stared at the termination documents that Richard had prepared with typical efficiency, the legal language crafted to provide maximum protection for the company while destroying Mark Rivera's employment with surgical precision. 18 months of steady work, health insurance that Sophia desperately needed, the modest stability he had built for his small family. All of it would disappear because he had accepted a chess challenge that others had turned into entertainment. "There has to be another way," she said, though the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "There is," Richard replied, his tone suggesting he had anticipated this objection. "You could take a leave of absence yourself. Remove the Hawthorne family from daily operations until the controversy subsides. Let the board bring in interim leadership to manage the crisis." The ultimatum crystallized everything Claire had been trying to avoid acknowledging. Her uncle wasn't just proposing damage control. He was orchestrating a corporate coup that would remove both her and Daniel from power, while positioning himself as the steady hand needed to guide the company through turbulent times. "You've been planning this," she realized, the pieces of Richard's strategy suddenly becoming clear. "The emergency meetings, the client concerns, the stock price pressure. You've been amplifying the crisis to justify a leadership change." "I've been protecting a company that your father built and that your poor judgment is threatening to destroy," Richard replied, his mask of avuncular concern finally slipping to reveal the calculating ambition beneath. "The board has lost confidence in your decision-making capabilities. The chess match was simply the catalyst that made existing concerns impossible to ignore." Claire looked around the table at faces that had once been allies, noting how corporate loyalty evaporated when stock prices declined and client relationships became uncertain. These were people she had worked with for years, whose opinions she had valued, and whose support she had counted on. Now they sat in judgment of her leadership while offering her the choice between sacrificing Mark Rivera's livelihood or her own position. "I need time to consider the options," she said finally, though she already knew what her decision would be. "Time is a luxury we can't afford," Margaret replied, checking her watch with the precision of someone accustomed to managing complex schedules. "The board needs a decision by close of business today. Either Mr. Rivera's employment is terminated, or we implement the interim leadership structure until this crisis resolves." As the meeting adjourned and board members filed out with the satisfied efficiency of people who had successfully managed a difficult situation, Claire remained seated at the mahogany table, staring at the termination documents that would solve all of her professional problems while creating a moral crisis she wasn't sure she could survive. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city spreading beneath her like a conquered kingdom, full of people whose lives were shaped by decisions made in rooms like this by people like her. For the first time in her career, Claire Hawthorne found herself wondering whether winning was worth the cost of victory, and whether the empire she had spent her life building was worth preserving if it required sacrificing the people who made it function. The choice between Mark Rivera's livelihood and her own power would define not just her career, but the kind of person she chose to be when faced with impossible decisions. And for the first time since her father's death, Claire wasn't sure which choice would make him proud. The knock on Mark Rivera's apartment door came at 7:15 p.m., just as he and Sophia were finishing dinner at their small kitchen table. Sophia had been practicing her breathing exercises with the diligence of someone who understood that her health required constant attention, while Mark reviewed the maintenance schedule for the next day with the methodical efficiency that had kept him employed for 18 months. He opened the door expecting to find Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall, who occasionally needed help with her television or asked to borrow tools for minor repairs. Instead, Claire Hawthorne stood in the narrow hallway, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, and her designer suit replaced by jeans and a sweater that made her look more human and less like a corporate icon. Hi, she said, her voice carrying an uncertainty that seemed foreign to someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. I know it's dinner time, and I should have called first, but I needed to talk to you about something important. Claire! Sophia called from the kitchen table, her face lighting up with the genuine enthusiasm that children reserved for people they considered special. Did you come to play chess with the new pieces? I've been practicing the moves you showed me. Mark stepped aside to let Claire enter, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands moved restlessly as if she couldn't quite figure out what to do with them. Something significant had happened. He could read it in her posture, in the careful way she avoided his eyes while greeting Sophia with genuine warmth. Actually, Claire said, settling into the chair across from Sophia with movements that seemed less natural than during her previous visits, I came to talk to your dad about something serious. But first, I want to see how you're feeling with the new medication. Sophia launched into an enthusiastic description of her improved breathing, demonstrating her expanded lung capacity with the pride of someone who had conquered a significant challenge. Mark watched Claire's face during the recitation, noting how she listened with complete attention despite whatever crisis had brought her to their apartment. That's wonderful, Claire said when Sophia finished her demonstration. The doctors must be very pleased with your progress. They are, Mark confirmed, though he was studying Claire's expression for clues about her real purpose. Sophia's been able to participate in activities that were impossible before the new treatment protocol. I'm glad, Claire said, and Mark could hear genuine relief in her voice, because that makes what I need to tell you both a little easier. She turned to face Mark directly, her business composure returning as she prepared to deliver news that clearly wasn't pleasant. The board met today to discuss the ongoing situation with the viral video. They've given me an ultimatum. Mark felt his stomach drop even before she explained the details. In his experience, ultimatums from corporate executives rarely ended well for maintenance workers. They want me to terminate your employment, Claire continued, her voice steady despite the difficulty of the words. The official reason would be violation of company reputation standards, though we both know that's just legal justification for removing what they consider a public relations problem. Sophia looked between them with the sharp intelligence of a child who understood that something important was happening even if the details remained unclear. What does that mean? She asked quietly. It means, Mark said carefully, that some people think it would be better if I didn't work at Claire's company anymore. Because you won at chess? Sophia's voice carried the particular indignation that children felt when faced with obvious injustice. That's stupid. You're really good at your job, and you only played chess because they asked you to. Claire's expression softened at Sophia's defense of her father, though the pain in her eyes remained evident. You're absolutely right, she told Sophia. It is stupid, which is why I'm not going to do it. Mark felt surprise wash over him like cold water. What? I told the board I wouldn't terminate your employment, Claire explained, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I told them that firing someone for being good at chess was exactly the kind of corporate arrogance that the viral video made us look foolish for having in the first place. And they accepted that? Mark asked, though he suspected the answer would be more complicated. They gave me a choice, Claire said simply. Fire you, or take a leave of absence myself while they bring in interim leadership to manage the crisis. The implications hit Mark like a physical blow. Claire was choosing between his job and her own career, between his family stability and her position as head of the company she had spent 15 years building. You can't do that, he said immediately. I won't let you sacrifice your career for my job. Take their deal. Fire me. I'll find something else. No, Claire replied with the firm authority that had made her legendary in business negotiations. I've made my decision. I'm taking the leave of absence. Why? Mark asked, genuinely bewildered by the choice that seemed to make no economic or professional sense. Claire was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between Mark and Sophia, as if she were seeing them clearly for the first time. Because 3 weeks ago, I thought winning meant never losing. I thought success meant always being the smartest person in the room. I thought leadership meant making decisions that protected my interests and my company's profits. She paused, reaching across the table to touch the wooden chess set she had given Sophia, her fingers tracing the carved details of the White Queen. Then your daughter taught me that the best chess games are the ones where everyone learns something new. Your dad moves showed me that intelligence comes in forms I'd never considered. And watching you in that hospital made me realize that the most important victories have nothing to do with corporate quarterly reports. Sophia had been listening with the focused attention that children gave to conversations they sensed were important beyond their understanding. Are you sad about losing your job? She asked Claire with characteristic directness. I'm not losing it, Claire explained gently. I'm taking a break from it to figure out what kind of person I want to be when I come back. What will you do during your break? Sophia asked. Claire smiled, and for the first time since arriving, the expression seemed genuinely peaceful. I thought maybe I could learn more about chess. The real kind, where friendship moves count as victories. Mark felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that Claire's choice represented more than corporate politics or guilt-driven charity. She was choosing principle over profit, human connection over institutional loyalty, the kind of leadership that his daughter's philosophy of chess had been trying to teach her. Are you sure about this? He asked one final time. I've never been more sure of anything, Claire replied. Besides, Sophia promised to teach me how to make the pieces dance when they're not playing games. I figure it's time I learned. As Sophia excitedly began setting up the chessboard for another lesson in her special rules, Mark realized that Claire Hawthorne was about to discover something he had learned 8 years earlier. That the most important victories in life couldn't be measured in dollars or titles or stock prices, but in the quality of connections you made with people who mattered. The corporate world would have to wait. For now, there were more important games to play. 6 months later, the community center in Sophia's neighborhood buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with corporate politics or viral videos. The Chess for Change fundraiser had drawn an eclectic crowd that mixed business suits with work uniforms, expensive handbags with backpacks held together by duct tape, creating the kind of genuine diversity that most corporate events achieved only through carefully managed optics. Claire Hawthorne stood near the registration table, her jeans and casual sweater a far cry from the power suits that had once defined her professional identity. The leave of absence from Hawthorne Strategies had evolved into something more permanent, a conscious choice to step away from an empire built on assumptions she could no longer defend. The company continued under Richard's leadership, its stock price recovering as markets rewarded the return to traditional corporate values. Claire found she cared less about those numbers with each passing day. 5 minutes until the exhibition match, announced Dr. Patricia Chen, who had volunteered to serve as the event's coordinator after learning about Sophia's involvement in organizing chess lessons for children with chronic illnesses. The pediatric pulmonologist had been amazed by Sophia's progress over the past months, both medically and personally, as the 8-year-old had transformed from a patient into an advocate for other children facing similar challenges. Near the center of the room, Mark Rivera finished setting up the demonstration board where he and Daniel would play their long-awaited rematch. The months since their viral encounter had been kind to Mark. His new position as community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit focused on children's health services, paid less than his maintenance job, but offered the kind of meaningful work that made him eager to get up in the morning. His employee health insurance remained excellent, ensuring Sophia's continued access to the treatments that had given her a normal childhood. Daniel Hawthorne approached the board with an expression that mixed nervous anticipation with genuine humility. The former chess prodigy had spent the past 6 months in what he called, quote, therapeutic exploration, quote, using his leave of absence to examine the assumptions that had shaped his understanding of intelligence and competition. His return to chess came not from a desire to reclaim his reputation, but from a genuine curiosity about Mark's unconventional approach to the ancient game. "Ready for another lesson in dad moves?" Mark asked with a gentle smile that held no trace of mockery. "Ready to learn," Daniel replied, extending his hand across the board with the respect due to a worthy teacher. "Though I should warn you, I've been practicing Sophia's friendship moves. She's been a very patient instructor." Sophia beamed from her position beside the demonstration board, where she would provide commentary for the audience, while both players explained their thinking process. Her role as co-host had been her own idea, born from a desire to help other children understand that chess could be about joy and creativity, rather than just winning and losing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sophia announced into the microphone with the confidence of someone who had discovered her own voice, "welcome to our chess match that's really about friendship and learning cool new things." The game that followed was unlike anything the crowd had expected. Daniel opened with classical precision, but when Mark responded with one of his characteristic dad moves, Daniel didn't retreat into defensive calculations. Instead, he asked Mark to explain the tactical idea, turning the game into a collaborative exploration of chess possibilities rather than a battle for dominance. "This move looks random," Daniel observed as Mark repositioned a knight to a square that violated several opening principles. "But I'm starting to see how it creates pressure that's hard to calculate in advance." "Sophia calls it the surprise party move," Mark explained to the audience. "The knight looks like it's going to the wrong party, but it actually knows exactly where the real celebration is happening." Claire watched from the audience as the two men who had become unlikely friends demonstrated that competition could coexist with collaboration, that winning could be redefined as mutual learning rather than zero-sum victory. The game proceeded through middle game complications, where both players paused to explore alternative moves, asking what-if questions that turned each position into a teaching moment. "Friendship move," Sophia announced, when Daniel made a sacrifice that improved Mark's position while creating beautiful tactical complications for both sides to enjoy. The crowd applauded not for the tactical brilliance, though both players demonstrated genuine skill, but for the obvious enjoyment both men took in the shared exploration of chess possibilities. This wasn't the corporate theater that had made their first encounter viral content, but something deeper. Two intelligent people learning from each other's perspectives. The game ended not in checkmate, but in a position that both players declared too beautiful to ruin with the winner, electing instead to reset the board and analyze the key moments together. The crowd's applause was warm and sustained, recognizing that they had witnessed something more valuable than a chess game, a demonstration that different forms of intelligence could complement rather than compete with each other. As the evening wound down and families began to pack up their chess sets, many purchased from a local vendor who had donated 20% of proceeds to the Children's Health nonprofit, Claire found herself in conversation with Richard Hawthorne, who had attended the event with obvious reluctance but growing interest. "The company is doing well," he reported, though his tone suggested the success felt less satisfying than he had anticipated. "Stock price is up, client relationships are stable, the viral video is mostly forgotten." "I'm glad," Claire replied, and she meant it. "The company means a lot to a lot of people. I'm happy it's thriving." "Are you?" Richard asked, studying his niece's face with the attention he usually reserved for quarterly reports. "Happy, I mean, with this lifestyle change." Claire looked around the community center, taking in the sight of children teaching adults chess moves, parents learning alongside their kids, volunteers cleaning up with the efficiency of people who cared about their shared space. Mark was showing a group of teenagers how knights could work together to control key squares, while Sophia demonstrated her dancing pieces theory to a cluster of younger children who giggled with delight at each tactical surprise. "I'm learning what happiness actually means," Claire said simply. "Turns out it's not the same thing as winning." As the last families headed home and the volunteers finished stacking chairs, Claire helped Sophia and Mark pack up their chess sets with the comfortable efficiency of people who had found their proper place in the world. The viral video that had started everything was forgotten now. replaced by the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered and connections that deepened rather than competed. The wager had been won, but not in any way Claire could have predicted 6 months earlier. The real victory hadn't been measured in chess moves or corporate quarterly reports, but in the transformation of 3 lives that had learned to see winning as something larger than personal advancement. In a world that often rewarded conquest over connection, they had chosen to play a different game entirely, one where friendship moves counted as victories, and the best stories were the ones where everyone learned something new. The pieces were put away, but the game would continue tomorrow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.